Welcome to the Deer Hunter Podcast, a platform created to entertain, educate, and evolve the modern-day deer hunter.
How's it going?
Hi Heather, how are you? Can you hear me?
You still there?
Did you drop your phone?
Oh yeah, slippery little sucker.
Perfect.
But it's all in one piece. How's your day going?
Honestly, I'm a little bit under the weather.
Oh no!
I know, and I got like somewhat of a backcountry deer hunt planned for this weekend, so I'm hoping it's just like a quick bug and it's in and out. But today I was a little bit out of commission, but I don't know, it's a combination of not feeling 100%, and we've had above average temperatures here in Michigan for probably the last couple weeks, and today was like the first like shit day of weather that blew in like sideways rain all day and
oh, gross.
extreme temperature drop. So the combination of that and not feeling good just kind of put me in like couch mode, honestly.
Yeah, I hear that. Well, I hope that you recover quickly and can get out there this weekend.
Yeah, it would
I know how important that is.
It would take a hell of a lot to keep me from going hunting this weekend. It's like I said, it's been above average temperatures here, so I really haven't done any deer hunting yet. So this is kind of like my first go, and I'm pretty gung-ho about it. So it would take a lot to keep me out of the woods this weekend.
Cool.
So
that's exciting.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about deer hunting because I'm super interested about how you guys go about deer hunting versus how I do it here in Michigan. And I guess before we get into that, I kind of want to set the stage for our listeners and myself, because this is the first time that you and I have really conversed, and you are a entrepreneur, business owner, and you do your work essentially in the backcountry, and you are a resident of Anchorage, Alaska. Am I correct?
Yep. I'm pretty good so far.
All right, good. So I guess my first question is, are you originally from Alaska, or did you move to Alaska?
Nope, I was born and raised here in Alaska, and the place where we live is about 25 miles south of Anchorage, a little place called Bird Creek. There's maybe, I want to say 100 residents that are there, but my dad was born and raised here in Alaska, so was my mom, and the house that we live in is actually where my dad was born. So it's kind of a neat spot since it's been in the family for 3 generations now.
Wow. I'm assuming you've done some traveling. Did you go away to school at all? Did you do your schooling in Alaska? Have you just stayed in Alaska all along, or did you do any venturing out?
I left for college when I was 18 and went to Western Washington University in Bellingham. And honestly, the reason I went there was because Mount Baker was right there. I grew up as a skier and just decided that I was going to go ski my whole way through college. But then I ended up getting roped into joining the women's rowing team, and that kind of put my snowboarding career on the back burner. But it kind of started the next phase of my life and really is what got me into athletics in general. So it ended up working out really well for me. And from there, I moved to Colorado to continue my career as a raft guide, which again, like, ended up getting out there and deciding I wanted to do something different. And that's where I ended up joining a CrossFit gym and getting really excited about paleo and functional fitness and kind of getting into all of that stuff. So done a fair amount of traveling and eventually decided I really wanted to move back to Alaska just because our summers are really unbeatable.
Yeah. What is the weather like there yearly? I mean, in comparison to me here in Michigan, we've got I guess I'd identify winter as like the middle of November, December, January, February, March, and then in April, May, we have a couple months of spring, and then June, July, August typically are hot summer months lingering into September, and then we kind of mid-September to mid-October set into fall, and then back we carry fall through to December. Your season's a little bit different there.
It's pretty close, except it feels like our winter is 7 months long.
Yeah.
It really feels like, it's October now, and it definitely feels like fall, but snow is in the mountains and winter is fast approaching. So I feel like winter for us is typically November, December, January, February, March for sure. So at least 5 months. And this is in Anchorage. Winter might start a bit sooner as you travel higher north in the state. And then we have breakup season, which is April and May. So kind of spring, but it's typically just a lot of mud.
Right.
And then June, July, and August are unbelievably beautiful, and that's when we get the 24 hours of daylight and the midnight sun. And this year it wasn't exceptionally hot. I wouldn't say it ever really gets hot in Anchorage, though. We might see temperatures in the 50s and 60s and 70s, but very rarely in the 80s.
Oh.
Where again, if you travel further north to Fairbanks, you can have days that are in the 90s pretty consistently. So yeah, I would say we have a very mild climate, but definitely a lot of cold and dark paired with a lot of bright and sunny days in the summer months.
You said as you go, you could go farther north, they could have hotter summers, and typically like around here, obviously the farther north you go, the more mild the climate gets. Is that just because of like coastal weather patterns?
Exactly. So Anchorage is right on the coast, whereas if you travel towards Fairbanks in the interior, they have some of the greatest temperature swings that you'll see, because it can be 70 below in the winter or it can be 90 above in the summer. And it might even be more dramatic than that. So
Yeah.
Fairbanks is a very dynamic place.
Interesting. Yeah. Most of our weather here in Michigan, we see the same thing actually. I mean, we can see a couple winters ago, we had a couple like historical low temperatures throughout the winters, and I think we saw 40 below a couple times, and then the last couple summers have been kind of mild, but I remember growing up as a kid, seeing 100, 110, in that range. So, and sometimes it's
Holy cow.
yeah, and sometimes it could be. There's always a ton of humidity here. Obviously, we're surrounded by the Great Lakes, so there's no such thing as like a dry heat here in Michigan. It's always, super muggy, which amplifies to it quite a bit.
Sure.
But yeah,
Holy cow.
like come October, this time of year, boy, if you're going hunting, it could be 80, it could be 20. I've sat out in the spring, turkey hunting, same day, 1 year later, the first year sit in a foot of snow and 30 degrees, and the next year sit in a t-shirt and it's 75 and sunny on the exact same day. So the weather patterns here can be pretty crazy too.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. We were out deer hunting this weekend in Prince William Sound, and it was, probably like in the low 50s, probably low 40s at night, and just really dynamic weather, because it can be the most beautiful place on earth and crystal clear, and just all you can see is the ocean and mountains and the moon and stars and sunrise, and it's just an unbelievable setting. But then by the end of the day, it can be blowing at 40 knots and pouring down rain, and you're wondering if you're ever going to make it out of there alive. It's just crazy how different the weather can be in a place like that.
Yeah, I was actually just watching. Um, um, you're probably familiar with Remy Warren. He does some hunting shows and big social media figure, and they were on. They're on an island just off of Alaska. They were just filming an elk hunt. I'm gonna struggle to remember what the name of one of those big islands. It starts with an A. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
I keep hearing a lot about a Fognac. People
Fognac.
seem to be going there a lot.
Yeah. And they were showing, what the weather was like when they were there. And it was just, yeah, like ripping their shelters apart, sideways rain. It didn't look like a pleasurable experience.
Yeah. Like I say, you got to take the bad with the good up here, because it can be so treacherous, but when it's good, it's unbeatable.
Yeah, right. So backcountry, your work, well, you kind of give me and the listeners the rundown on what you do for your profession, how you got started, and kind of bring me up to speed to where you are today as a company and what you do.
Sure. So when I was first getting into the backcountry, I was mostly doing pack rafting trips or overnight rafting trips, and just kind of starting to fall in love with the whole experience of going out into the wilderness and getting to these places that you feel like no one else has ever seen before, or getting into these situations where suddenly you're kind of pushing yourself physically and mentally. And I'm sure we've all had that experience in the backcountry, where it's not only physically challenging being out there, but it's also really mentally challenging to commit to something like a 5, a 10, or a 30-day expedition. And when I started getting into these trips, I realized that it was really difficult to actually pack healthy, delicious food. And one of the first trips that I did was in Denali National Park. And we had pack rafts and dry suits and PFDs and helmets and all of our camping gear and all of our rain gear, rubber boots, trekking poles, like you name it. We just had really heavy packs. And then at the backcountry office, they handed me this black box, basically, and said, here's your bear canister. You need to fit all of your food in here. And at the time, I was just dumbfounded as to how I was actually going to fit 3 days worth of calories into this black tote type thing, and where I was even going to put it in my backpack. And that's when I realized that I really wanted to come up with that solution, come up with that really healthy, delicious food that was packable. Because I had a lot of friends on the trip who were eating freeze-dried meals, but the bags were, 12 or 14 inches tall, and they kept having to stick their whole wrists and everything down into this bag to scoop out the food at the bottom. And I was super freaked out about it, because I was sharing a tent with these people in bear country.
Right.
And that's when I was, thinking to myself and saying to the group, like, there has to be a solution. There has to be like good food that's in a shorter bag so that you're not going to get eaten alive by a grizzly bear in bear country. So it was from that trip and a couple other adventures that I'd been on that I started dehydrating my own food. And it was really just out of experiment of seeing, could I make turkey jerky, and could I dehydrate leftover meals, or could I make fruit leathers? And it just turned into this really fun pastime and something that I just love to do, because it's a very creative challenge for me. And then inevitably I started handing out samples of these foods that I was dehydrating and getting really good feedback from my friends, especially people in the pack rafting community. And so it was the summer of 2014 that I had prepared and labeled and shipped out probably like 60 or so meals at least, and just sent them to my friends and gotten feedback. And they had said to me, yeah, you should totally turn this into a business. And so I launched my website, heatherschoice.com, in August of 2014. So I've now been in business 3 years, and it has been just a really incredible experience for me, because I took something that was very much my little baby, just like my pet project, and had considered, this would be really cool if I could do this for a living, because I get to be in the kitchen and I get to be creative and I get to, put healthy food in people's backpacks. Like, what a gift that is. And it has just turned into so much more than that. And now we are the most well-funded food startup in Alaska. We've attracted a ton of customers, especially from the hunting community. We've shipped to every state in the country and into Canada. And my little hobby has just kind of blossomed into a business that now takes care of me and my family, and it's just a really incredible experience all around. So we make dehydrated breakfast, snacks, and dinners for the backcountry, and we have some of the most lightweight, packable food that you will find, and everything is gluten, soy, and dairy-free. So like I say, I could tell you a whole lot more about the product, but that kind of gives you an idea of where my interest in this came from and a little bit of the journey of how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's refreshing to hear because, being like a young entrepreneur, I think a lot of people dream of doing that. And to actually turn that from a dream into reality, uh, I think it's intimidating to a lot of people. There's a ton that goes on behind the scenes to make it happen. And what you're saying right now is like proof and testament that it can still be done if you're willing to, if you have a good idea and you're willing to put the work in to accomplish it, it can still happen, right?
Anything is possible. It can absolutely happen. And I feel like there's been a lot of opportunities for this thing to fail, like hundreds, if not thousands of times that I've fallen on my face or have just had that feeling of, oh, this can't go on anymore. This is too hard. And I think it's just straight up stubbornness on my part. It's the only reason that we're still here today. But yeah, it's getting to the point now where it's almost getting easier, I think. And I definitely encourage anybody who is interested in getting into business for themselves to absolutely just go for it, because you have no idea where it's going to take you or how it's going to pan out, but it will be enlightening for sure.
Yeah. Like I said, it's refreshing to hear, just on a smaller scale in the hunting industry, it seems like nowadays everyone that is real passionate about it wants to do more than just go out and deer hunt, myself included. I wanted to start something. I'm investing all this time into something that I already love, and I just see it a lot, like on social media and whatnot. It seems like hardly anybody nowadays is going out into the woods without a camera and filming their hunts, or have sponsorship opportunities, or they're trying to create and promote products. And what you're saying, is just proof that if you do have a good idea and you are willing to, put the extra work in, you can do it. But you have to have both those things. You have to have kind of a good original idea, and you got to be willing to put in just unbelievable amounts of work, right? I mean, when you started, were you just working out of like essentially your kitchen?
Oh yeah, it's been so this is kind of the funny part. When I moved back to Alaska in the summer of 2014, I was living a 27-foot camper,
Nice.
which was kind of like the ideal summer home in Alaska. But the problem was is that I didn't have a big enough kitchen to cook in. So I ended up house sitting for multiple people just so that I could use their kitchen and plug in my dehydrators. That's basically how I spent my summer, was just driving around with dehydrators and ingredients and packaging and whatever. And then I eventually found a restaurant, or it's actually a coffee shop here in Anchorage, that let me use their kitchen in the evening hours. And then from there, ended up hooking up with some friends of mine in Colorado and basically hiring them to cook and dehydrate my recipes for me. And from there, I've tried out probably 3 or 4 different spaces or different contract manufacturing or co-packing or whatever you want to call it. And like I say, literally 3 years later, I am still in the process of securing our own kitchen space. And it is my all-consuming project is fundraising and negotiating to get us our own dedicated kitchen that will be 100% gluten-free and USDA inspected. So just like you already said, it is a unbelievable amount of work. And that's why I almost don't encourage people to write business plans, because if you knew how much work it was going to take, you never would start. You would absolutely never sign up to do this if you knew how much sweat equity you were going to have to put in. But that's really what it takes, is that unwavering faith that it's going to work and that bullheaded stubbornness to just keep doing what needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, I can see it being super critical that if you are working that much, and you're exerting that kind of energy on a day-to-day level, um, you do need to be in shape, and you do need to be eating healthy food to like keep your body good and to keep your head good, and to not just completely like lose your shit and fall apart because trying to live life at that pace, and putting unhealthy food in your body daily and being out of shape and overweight, it's pretty hard to keep your head on straight and to keep your energy to a level that you need to get those kind of things accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned,
And you see it a lot in the entrepreneur community too. You see that there's almost like that dichotomy of the people who realize that they have to be taking care of themselves first in order to serve others, or the people who have just said, I don't care about my health and I don't care about anything else. Like everything else is going out the window and the only thing I'm focused on is this business. And I don't think that that's sustainable long term for anybody.
sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. Um, you talked about paleo, that you got into paleo, and I'll just brief it with, I kind of do a similar thing. I try to stay on like a ketogenic diet and do, you know, paleo based for the most part. I'm not real strict on it. But I make like an honest go every day, every week to kind of the core of my diet to be that principle. And I
Hmm.
found it to be like extremely beneficial to me. It's one of the only ways that I've ever been able to maintain my weight and to stay in shape without, spending like endless hours at the gym and endless hours exercising, which is time, just I just don't have that kind of time nowadays working a full-time job, having a family, trying to do hobbies. There's like I figured there had to be, some type of sustainable solution. And then when I started reading up on ketogenic and paleo, I started implementing a lot of that in my diet, and I'll just say that it like forever changed my life.
Awesome. That's so freaking cool to hear.
Do you use a lot of healthy foods in I mean, how do you pack calories? Like you were talking about earlier about how am I going to get all these calories that I need to get me through, a couple days. And so I'll say that, a lot of our following here is in the Midwest. And obviously I've done 95% of my hunting here in the Midwest, which usually isn't a real big backcountry experience, but starting this spring, I wanted to try to make an effort to get more into it, and so, I went into like a state forest, 105,000 acres this year up in northern Michigan, and the plan was to like walk out of the truck Friday night, pack in like a mile, set up a camp, and then not come out of the woods for a couple days. And I started putting food together and like planning my meals, and I'm just like, this is gonna get really heavy really fast. And like normally when I go on hunting trips, I'm walking out of like the store with a shopping cart full of food and like grocery bags full of food that we would normally take to like, deer camp or something. And I'm looking that I've got to get all of this just in a small pack and keep my weight down and have water and everything else. And it's it's a real eye opener. Like you go from like, I guess, indulgence to like somewhat of a more survival based of what your body actually needs versus what it wants to be in good shape for a couple days.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm right there with you in the paleo camp. That was kind of my definition of healthy food. Was I was looking to have lean meats, fruits, nuts, and vegetables, good healthy fats, and be able to pack all of that stuff in my bag and head out into the backcountry where there's no refrigeration and your food might get hot, it might freeze, it could be any temperature in between, and you need to protect it from bears. So that was kind of the criteria that I was working with. And so I found that what I needed to do was really focus on getting enough protein every day. And people who have heard me speak before are probably like, holy cow, this girl's obsessed with protein. But I really think that it is just critical for not only our mental capacity, just being able to focus, having enough protein on board so you're not constantly hungry. I think it's important for maintaining our muscle mass and for feeling full and satisfied after a meal. So I put a serious emphasis on making sure I get enough protein, whether I'm at home or in the backcountry. So that usually means doing quite a bit of jerkies, or the dehydrated meals that we make start with 6 ounces of lean protein, and then we add lots of fruits and vegetables and then a little bit of fat in order to round out the calories. And then I also do things like collagen or egg white protein, just some kind of fun stuff like that along the way to make sure that I'm getting a sufficient amount every day. And then from there, like I said, getting enough carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables seems to be pretty easy, especially if you're doing dehydrated foods. Something like a quarter cup of raisins can have, nearly 30 grams of carbohydrates in it. And like you had mentioned, if you're doing more of a keto approach, then you're not so worried about getting in enough carbs every day. Instead, you're worried about, how do I pack in enough butter and coconut oil to keep me going on this trip? But for myself, I usually will take in anywhere from 150 to 300 grams of carbs a day. And it's coming from fruits and vegetables, or what I consider to be safe starches like white rice, white potatoes, maybe a little bit of corn or gluten-free oats here and there. And then, like I said, lots of good quality fats. That's the easiest way to pack calories in the backcountry.
Yeah. You're probably quite a bit more educated on gluten than I am. Break that down for me a little bit, why that's like a critical thing and why you feel that it's important.
Yeah, so with gluten, for people who aren't familiar with it, gluten is a protein that's found in just a handful of different grains. So wheat, barley, rye, some of our favorite grains that go into making beer. They're all the gluten-containing grains. And like I said, gluten is a protein that is somewhat difficult to digest, especially for people who have celiac disease. They may not be able to break that down at all, and it can have a pretty damaging effect on their gut lining or their small intestine. And then there's a handful of people like myself who maybe can digest gluten, but there's other ramifications down the road. I have a condition called psoriasis, which is an autoimmune condition. And so if I have something that contains gluten, I will see a very quick reaction with breakouts. And so that's been really motivating for me to keep that out of my diet altogether, just because obviously I don't want to have to deal with this condition. But again, for a lot of people, this protein gluten is either difficult or impossible for them to fully digest and assimilate. And so when you have undigested proteins in your gut, they can actually interact with your gut lining, and they can contribute to something called leaky gut syndrome. And the easiest way to think about this is you can take all of your fingers and interlace them super tight. And that's how our gut lining should be. It should be these nice tight junctions between our fingers where undigested food particles are not able to release from the small intestine into the bloodstream. However, if you create a little bit of space in between your fingers and kind of assimilate what leaky gut syndrome is like, that's when you do have holes between your fingers and in your gut lining, and it's allowing undigested food, like a bit of gluten from the carbohydrates that you're eating, or it could be even undigested steak from your dinner, or it could be a whole host of different things. But when undigested food gets from the small intestine into the bloodstream, it creates this really intense immune reaction. Your body basically goes onto high alert and says there is, a foreign object floating around the bloodstream, and we need to do something about it because it doesn't belong there. And so then it causes your immune system to go into overdrive to kind of take care of this foreign invader, and it can create systemic inflammation throughout your whole body. So if you ever go on a backcountry trip and you feel like, holy cow, I'm just always achy, or I'm sore, or like, man, I feel swollen, or you just don't feel very good. This could be in the front country or the backcountry. It can be related to that systemic inflammation that's going on in your body, which could be, not saying it always is, but it could be directly correlated to your digestion and assimilation of the food that you eat. So, that is a entire novel's worth of stuff to talk about when it comes to gluten.
No, I love it.
But hopefully that's an easy way for people to kind of grasp the concept of what is gluten and why is it potentially something to take a look at in your own nutrition plan.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important because I don't think a lot of people, everybody hears about it and you see it on packaging of food now, but I don't think as many people understand what it is as necessary. I essentially knew some of what you just told me, but you did a good job of explaining it in detail, and I can attest to, when I tried to remove, let's say by removing a lot of carbohydrate-based foods and trying to eliminate sugar out of my diet by trying to do like a ketogenic-based principle, obviously a result of that was way less gluten in my diet, right? And I never felt better in my life. Like it was amazing how, so I set a goal 2 years ago. I'm like 5'8". I went to the doctor, weighed 196 pounds. I was, more overweight than I had ever been in my life, and I was determined to change that. I set a goal to lose 20 pounds, which I realized was quite a bit, but, I figured that I could do it if I just put my mind to it, and essentially keep exercising, and essentially just be hungry for like 6 months. And I came across the guy, Mark Sisson. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his book, The Primal Blueprint.
That is the book I recommend to people above anything else. That is the perfect book for somebody who's just getting into this stuff.
Yeah, and I heard him on Joe Rogan's podcast, and then I read a lot of his material, and I implemented it along with some functional strength training, and I ended up losing 34 pounds. So I was like,
Holy shit, that's
I was
awesome.
sold. I was totally sold. And just, man, my mentality, like just how my daily approach to tasks was so much better. And, you know, I rant and raved to everybody around me about it for like, a couple years, because a couple years went by. And I had lost that kind of weight, not that kind of weight, but I maybe had gone through a stint before where like, hey, I lost 10 pounds or 15 pounds and it was very noticeable, but it would always creep back up on me. And for me to be able to lose that amount of weight and still to this day, this is going on over 3 years now. I haven't gained a single pound back, which is amazing. Now I've neglected in my exercise regimen in the last probably 8 months, basically coinciding with the starting of a website and a podcast, which have taken up a lot of time that I used to invest in my physical health. Um,
Yep.
I was never the kind of person ever to sit in a chair behind a computer. I was always moving, always doing things. Um, but the point that I'm getting at is even though I let off on my exercise and I'm not in as good a shape as I was 8 months ago, I have not gained any weight, which has been pretty amazing to me, just basically off of the core of that platform of what the blueprint, the education that I got through that resource.
Yeah, that's freaking awesome. And honestly, it's so cool for me to see that because I see how the hunting community, like those are the people that are living the most primally of
Yeah,
anybody. Like there's plenty of people in CrossFit gyms or in tech companies or whatever who are like, oh yeah, I'm keto or I'm primal or I'm paleo, whatever, but they're not the people who are actually physically out there procuring their own food.
right.
Like going and hunting birds or hunting deer or picking mushrooms or like whatever. And it is so cool for me to sit back and kind of see this almost this transition for people who are already living such primal lifestyles to start incorporating primal diet and exercise into their habits and their yearly routine. And I think it is such a freaking powerful combination. Like if you can actually follow a primal blueprint diet plan, you can do lots of long, slow walks and heavy weightlifting and sprinting every once in a while. And you can make sure that the meat and fish and fowl that you're eating is wild caught or, from your own backyard or wherever. Like that is such a recipe for optimal health and enjoyment. I just think it's so freaking cool and exciting.
Yeah, and it partners extremely well because historically, for myself, it would be get up in the morning, roll out of bed, have some coffee, eat a big meal, right? Because I'm going to be sitting in the woods for hours and I'm not going to get to eat for a while. And although I'm sitting stationary, most of the way that we hunt here in the Midwest is, sitting in a tree stand. So you're basically stationary for hours, but you're out in the cold and your body's rapidly burning calories to try to maintain body temperature. And so typically within, sometimes 2 hours, even 3 hours, 4 hours at the most, I would find myself in a bad state of mind because I would be starving and now I'm not focused on essentially like what I'm doing. I'm thinking, yeah, I could be out here deer hunting, or I could go in right now and have like a huge bowl of chili and a couple hot dogs, and I would feel way better than I feel right now. And
Totally.
when I went away from a carbohydrate based diet and went to, essentially a fat based diet with a lot of protein and a lot of vegetables, I found that I didn't have that hunger curve. It was more of a steady, I guess, not I'm full and then I'm hungry. It was more of just a satisfied feeling throughout the day. and then, I could have the ability to sit, for maybe 6 hours and then have some small snack that was high in fat, and I could make it through the whole day on that. And I just felt that I was way sharper in the stand. My mentality was way better, way more positive, and I think that is a huge thing that separates good hunters and bad hunters is something as simple as your mentality, because it kind of more or less is a big part of your confidence of being out there. If you're out there and you feel like you're going to be successful at any minute, you're ready for that opportunity when it arises, versus having your mind wandering and thinking about how you're going to get your next meal when you're starving.
Totally. Yeah, it's super exciting stuff. And I just think that it's such a good fit for people to be out legitimately putting in so much effort into getting the healthiest food on the planet. And while you're doing that, to make sure that you are eating good, healthy food. Like, why wouldn't you put those two things together?
Yeah. Now, do you do any kind of like probiotic stuff at all? Do you implement that in your diet?
Yeah, I'm really, really into it, especially when I'm traveling. I'm a glutton for travel. Like, thankfully, I get to travel for work, and I try to take a couple of vacations every year. And especially when I'm doing that, where, again, your immune system is compromised, whether you're traveling via plane, train, or automobile, or you're traveling through the backcountry. And like you say, your body's having to work super hard to keep your body warm, or you have the stress of really long days. Those are the times that I really hammer on probiotics. And when I'm at home, I tend to just focus on eating fermented foods like sauerkraut and kimchi and kind of those fun things. We do some kombucha at home as well, but I think that probiotics for the backcountry are really, really important to keep your immune system healthy.
Yeah, I would agree. I do a lot of kombucha. I try to put one like in my lunch every day because, man, really, so I'm a plumber, so I'm on the road all day every day, right? I'm in a service van. I don't have a ton of access to healthy food when I'm on the road. A lot of times I don't have the time to, and honestly, it can really add up a lot too, right? So I try to pack a lunch, and I try to put a kombucha in there every day, and then try to do some of the fermented foods too. But I know that there's like some probiotic packs now, like almost like a multivitamin probiotics that you can take, and that's something that I need to look in here soon, because I know I don't get enough of them, but I try to do the kombucha as much as possible.
Yeah, awesome.
So let's move off of the health food stuff here for a minute, because what I really wanted to, what I was really excited to talk to you about was hunting and fishing in Alaska. I know,
It's pretty fun. I think you should come up here one of these
well,
years.
it's unbelievably tempting. Anchorage too looks like a really cool spot. I know you mentioned, gluten being in beer earlier, and I'll say that's probably my primary source of gluten is beer.
Probably a pretty good choice.
But Anchorage has like a lot of like, or I don't know about a lot, but they do have like some breweries, and there's like good food in Anchorage, right? And it kind of is all surrounded by like an outdoor lifestyle.
Yeah, it's funny. My dad actually started the first microbrewery here in
You're shitting
Alaska.
me.
It was called Bird Creek Brewery.
Nope.
No, I grew up like crawling around on big old sacks of yeast and hops and whatever. And, he ended up shutting it down when I was a kid, but there was a good 8 years there that my dad was brewing beer, and he's kind of considered the godfather of microbrews here in Alaska. So since then, there have been tons of breweries that have popped up. And if you do come up, we will totally go ride bikes around town and go visit all the microbreweries.
Oh God.
It'll be super fun.
Yep, you're speaking my language. You
Yeah, Anchorage's a good place for sure. People will complain about it because it's not very big. There's maybe 400,000 people here, which is nearly too much because we are sandwiched between the mountains of the Front Range and then the ocean. So it's a fairly expensive place to live, and there's not necessarily a ton of room for expansion, especially when it comes to housing.
Sure.
But it's also a small enough community that you feel very, very, very well supported here. At least I do. Like, obviously, having been born and raised here and having family, it's really easy to feel at home in Anchorage. But especially as a small business owner, holy cow, there's so much to be said for starting a business in a smaller city rather than a big one, just because you are only a couple degrees of separation between anybody in this town that you need to know to get funding or to get a consultant or contract work or labor, like whatever it is. Just having the small town feel, I think, has really helped my business a lot.
Yeah, I'll completely agree with that. I think a lot of people suffer from missing that sense of community in their in their life right now. You can even live in a small community and it doesn't have that feel anymore. I know a lot of times it's just the pace of life, right? A lot of people don't even know or converse with their neighbors. I've lived, well, I was born and raised in Michigan. I moved with what was my girlfriend at the time, that's now my wife, to Florida when she was going to school. And from Florida, we moved around a couple spots. And then we moved up to Chicago. And, I was basically in the suburbs of Fort Lauderdale down in Florida and then in the suburbs of Chicago for a while. And man, did I miss that sense of community and small town to the point where it saddened me on a weekly to not have that. And I think a lot of people don't have that in their life anymore, and it can really increase your quality of life in my eyes.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly for sure.
You mentioned when we were talking on the phone last week about combat fishing, and I'm interested to hear. So, is it a competitive fishing space up there?
Okay, so it depends on where you go. So where we live in Bird Creek, every July we get a big run of pink and silver salmon that come in. And because it's really close to Anchorage, it's easy for people to get in the car and head south, and 20 minutes later, you can be standing there at the mouth of the river fishing for salmon. And so it turns into combat fishing because you end up fishing with people shoulder to shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not my favorite way to fish. Like, I am not into that whatsoever. But if you go every day and you can get 2 silver salmon or 2 pinks or whatever, it can add up over the course of a month or so. So there's a handful of places up here where you will see quite a bit of that, where the salmon runs are just so freaking good and they're so short that people will just get a little bit ruthless and be shoulder to shoulder pulling salmon out of there. So that's one thing that we see. But the type of fishing that we really like to do is dip netting, where you can drive up to the Copper River or down to the Kenai from Anchorage, and you get these big old nets that are either 3 feet in diameter or 5 feet in diameter, and they have a 6 to 8 or even 12-foot long pole attached to them, and people will just basically put these nets in the water and let them sit there, and fish will swim upstream into the net, and then you have to turn this big old awkward net and yank it out of the water, bonk the fish, and then, you can do that all day long. The limit that we go for is 25 per household and then 10 per additional family member.
Oh, wow.
So this year we were looking to get 35 Copper River red salmon in a day, and it is so freaking fun. It's an absolute blast, but we only do that, once a year.
Now, are you able to use any of those kind of things in your food, or does your food all have to be sourced from commercial fisheries, or how does that work? I know there's obviously a ton of regulations when you're involved in manufacturing food, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. There's some wild crafting that we can do, but definitely not for meat or fish. And the fish that we get for our smoked sockeye salmon chowder and our snack packs is this is a phenomenal story. So we ended up partnering with a family fish processor down in Ninilchik, Alaska. They're about 4 hours south of us. But these folks every June and July will buy 5 to 10,000 fish, and it's all coming out of a place called Deep Creek. So it's coming out of the ocean. The fish comes up, they get it bled and on ice, and then they spend the entire winter smoking all of that fish, and all of it is cold smoked. So this family will do a really awesome dry brine on the fish that takes about, I think it's 12 hours or something crazy like that. But they dry brine the fish, and then they hang the fillets, and they smoke it with alder chips from their property. And then they make a cold smoked lox with it that is just unbelievably good. But we partnered with them because on every salmon fillet, there is about 25% of that fish that they can't use. It's basically the trimmings from the tail and the belly meat.
Mm-hmm.
And so that trim is what we actually use in our smoked sockeye salmon chowder. So we were able to take essentially their food waste and turn it into our best-selling meal. And it's been a really, really, really cool partnership with them. So
That's awesome.
looking forward to coming up with more awesome opportunities like that. And I think that that's something that, in the back of my mind, I can see that Heather's Choice will be more than just a dehydrated food company. We will also be part of the solution for food waste and the world food problem, honestly.
God.
So
Props. Good thinking, because there's a lot of waste. My wife is like on a mission right now. She has a children's clothing line, and she's trying to do like a somewhat of a ethically sourced and sustainable clothing line. And
wow.
yeah, and I think, she's just been shocked at like what she's uncovered, the amount of waste that I know it's a completely different subject, but in everything, I think nowadays, as consumers, we just waste and waste and waste, and so much of that stuff, there's things that could be done with it, and I know that, it's been brought to my eyes in my home as of late because, like I said, my wife's trying to do a children's clothing line that's not like garments that are going to be worn for 6 months or a year and a kid outgrows them and then they go in the trash. Something more long term and sustainable. So yeah, props to you for thinking in that manner.
Yeah, it's really fun to be looking at it from that perspective. And it's like you said earlier, for a business to work, you need a good idea and you need to put in all of the effort. I think the third thing that any business needs in order to really thrive is it needs to have a really good why or a really good purpose. Because if the reason is just to make money, I don't think it'll work. I don't think that is motivating enough to put in all of the hellacious hours and to put like every nickel and dime you have into something in order to maybe make that money back. Like, that's not motivating to me. But this idea of having something that is a little bit revolutionary or is just like going one step further and is making a really big difference and could outlive you, like, that's kind of exciting.
Yeah,
So.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's looking long term. When we're talking about health and fitness and I was relating it to hunting. One of my big concerns is I want to be able to do this when I'm 50, 60, potentially into my 70s. And I know that if I don't take, proper care of my body, that's not possible. So I'm looking for, more of a long-term solution.
Mhm. Absolutely.
I wanted to talk about deer hunting, and I didn't want to start off with it because if I got into that, I might neglect everything else.
Understandably so.
But you were just went on, you told me that you were going on a deer hunt this weekend, and how did it go? And can you kind of explain to me what you did?
Yeah, maybe you can tell us what we did wrong because we came back empty-handed. But we have a group of friends that every fall they take I think it's about a 28-foot boat, and we take it out of Whittier and then go about 60 miles out to this island in the middle of Prince William Sound. And there's tons of people who do this, but once you get out there, you feel like you have the whole world to yourself because there was nobody else on this island, and we nearly didn't see any other boats during that 60-mile boat ride. So anyway, we got out there Friday night, and it was just blowing sideways, like I say, just kind of terrible weather. But when we woke up in the morning, it was, absolutely clear and beautiful and just brisk. So we spent most of the day hiking, and since you're at sea level, it's really, really thick, just thick alders, thick devil's club, lots of trees. And we kept trying to navigate through the thick to get to these meadow areas where we could just sit and hang out and watch for deer for a while. We were looking for Sitka blacktails, and we saw one deer within like 5 minutes of our hike, and it was super exciting. Like, oh man, there's deer out here. We're going to see tons of them. And we didn't see another one for probably 3 hours, and it was just a doe up on a hill that saw us at the same time that we saw her, and boom, she was gone. Because again, it's just so thick that you can't see for more than 25 yards in any direction. So we were out there hiking from like 9 a.m. till about 5 p.m. on Saturday, and then Sunday the weather turned and it was just pouring down rain. So we were hiking from about 9 until 1. And I personally don't think we spent enough time just like sitting and listening and waiting and being a bit more patient. Instead, we were basically on our feet the whole time, hoping that we would spook something and then be able to go chase it down. But yeah, didn't end up getting anything. And the crazy part, though, is that we were also looking for black bears. And, you would think being super quiet, like sneaking around through the woods, that you would eventually like come up on a black bear. But no, we didn't see any critters while we were out there. But it was a great weekend regardless.
So were you guys staying in just like portable shelters when you're out there?
Yep, we just bring a tent and usually set up a lot of tarps for our little cooking area. It's pretty, we kind of packed as if we were lightweight backpackers just because it's easier than hauling in a wall tent and stuff like that. So we go pretty light for these trips.
Yeah, and the weather is relatively mild there right now. I mean, what was like your overnight low?
It was probably in the low 40s. So yeah, very, very mild here right now. Just
Yeah.
consistently wet.
Yeah, I'm going myself this weekend, and it was a planned tent hunt, and now they're calling for like heavy rain, potentially even thunderstorms, and we may be altering our plan to stay in my camper because I don't know that I want to be staying in a tent in a thunderstorm if I have the opportunity to be in a camper with heat. So
Yeah, for sure.
I've
So
seen
yeah, like
I've
like I say, it wasn't a successful weekend, but they're going back out this weekend. And when I went with these guys 2 years ago, we successfully brought back a buck, and it was some of the best meat we've ever had. So hopefully the boyfriend will be successful this weekend while I'm working.
Yeah, I was gonna say I know I saw a picture you or someone at your company sent me a picture to prove. I think they were attempting to prove your worthiness of being on a deer hunting podcast, and I'm going to use the picture for the Instagram post when I post this episode because it definitely proves your worthiness.
That's
And
freaking funny.
you probably didn't know, but you were actually the first female guest on the podcast. So
Yahoo! That's freaking
The
fun.
first lady deer hunter on the.
Yeah, it's
I intend going forward to have more female guests, but that the honesty of it, I don't have a lot of close female friends that deer hunt. I've reached out to a couple girls that are related to people that I know to get some female guests on, but it has been yet to happen. So you're the first.
Thank you. Well, yeah, it's pretty fun. I'm a brand new hunter, and so I definitely don't want to act as if I know anything about hunting whatsoever, but it has been super fun to start learning and to start experiencing the backcountry in a different way, because instead
Yeah.
of traveling as many miles as you can on any given day, which has been my experience with hiking and pack rafting a lot of the time, now all of a sudden you're getting to go to these places and maybe only have 3 or 5 mile days at most, but you're experiencing that landscape in such a different way, and it's just really, really fun for me and really exciting. And that's one of the roles that I play for backcountry hunters and anglers, is hopefully being a liaison or a mentor or a cheerleader for other females who are hoping to get into hunting. So all fingers crossed that there will be more lady hunters for you to talk with in the future who maybe are brand new to it but are as excited and enthusiastic about it as they can possibly be.
Yeah, that's great. I always kind of looked at it as I always spend a lot of time in the outdoors. And one of the things that's different about when I'm in the outdoors and I'm hunting is that when I'm out in the woods and I'm just hiking or scouting or whatever, I feel like like I'm trying to think of exactly how I phrase this. I'm present in nature, but when I am hunting, I'm taking part in nature, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
You're like
Yeah.
part of the whole cycle on a different level, and there's something about that that's always been a huge draw to me. So, um, yeah, and for you being into, health food, there's quite honestly, there's no better way to source it. I mean, obviously fishing is a great way, but to actually go out into the back country and acquire your a portion of your annual food supply is huge, and that's how my family lives. It's a huge part of my life and my family's lifestyle. I shoot 2 to 3 deer a year, and without exaggeration, we live off of it. So,
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And the way that we do this deer hunt every fall, it's the way that it's structured is that these guys will take us out on their boat, but there's usually a group of 5 to as many as 9 people who go. And so ideally, everybody gets an animal, and then it ends up getting split 9 ways, no matter what. So however many people are on the trip, even if only one person got all of the deer, it would still get split equally amongst everyone. And it's kind of sometimes it's frustrating if you're the only person who brings back an animal and you have to split it up 9 ways, but it is really gratifying to go with a group of people and to share meat with everybody and know how much everyone is going to appreciate it that winter. And that, I think, is just one more aspect of living in a community like Anchorage that is pretty special for us.
yeah, um, absolutely. It adds a different level to it when it's a group effort, and even a lot of the ways that we hunt. Even though when we go deer hunting, we typically don't, I guess we always share some to an extent, but we're usually not divvying it up, through 9 people. But it's always a camaraderie and a group effort, and it can really like build. It can really build a lot of strength and bonds to relationships that already exist. And my family and my friends that I deer hunt with are, my closest friends. So.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, we kind of covered most of the stuff I wanted to talk about. One thing I did want to ask you, you were talking about bears. Um, Obviously, that island that you were on this weekend, did they have grizzlies on it or just black bear?
I think where we were just had black bears, but we have plenty of grizzly bears in our neighborhood. We woke up the other day and there was two grizzlies in the backyard, and it's like, holy cow. It makes it a little spooky to go out and feed the chickens in the morning because you're like having to say hey bear as you go out the front door. It's a little bit silly.
Have you ever had any kind of like, close encounter, bad experience in the backcountry or just in general with bears? Obviously, where I live here in Michigan, we don't even have black bears. You have to drive a couple hours north of where I live, but obviously we're far away from grizzly country.
Sure. Yeah, I knock on wood, I'm really fortunate and I haven't had any bad encounters with bears myself. We did have a bear come through and take one of our, not one, but two of our chickens this year. So, like I say, mostly where we live, since we're right on the border of Chugach National Forest, we absolutely have bears, and they're super prevalent near our house in the summer months. But then when we're out on trips, whether it's, pack rafting or backpacking or mountain biking, we have bear bells and multiple cans of bear spray, and we're making a ton of noise, and we've got a dog with us. So I think just taking those precautionary measures really helps with your chances of having a negative bear encounter. So, but it's at the same time, it's always in the back of your mind when you're out traveling around here. Just even thinking about my boyfriend Brad going on a solo hunt for mountain goats, it's like, gosh, I don't feel great about that, because the likelihood of you having a bear encounter once you've gotten an animal on the ground just seems too
Mm-hmm.
high. So solo hunting up here, I'm not sure is always the best idea.
Yeah, I could say I see a lot of people do it. I obviously follow a lot of platforms that hunt out west and are always around grizzlies, and I don't know. I would struggle to enjoy it personally. It would be a long road for me to find comfort in sleeping in a tent alone in grizzly country.
Yeah, for sure. We were on a trip recently and we have bear spray in the tent with us, and there was a alpine lake nearby, and we had been watching bears through the binoculars all day while we were looking for mountain goats. And then all of a sudden, 5 o'clock in the morning, we heard this big splash in the lake that was near our tent. And I was like, gosh, like, A, I hope the bear doesn't come sniffing around our tent, but B, I also hope that I don't get sprayed in the face with bear spray at 5 o'clock in the morning if the bear does in fact decide to come over here. So
Yeah.
it's very unnerving, but it's just, once again, you just have to take all the necessary precautions and hope for the best. Hope you're not in the
Have
wrong
you
place at the
had
wrong time.
have you had any kind of scary, like real scary experiences in the backcountry? I mean, you just said you gotta take precautions and preparatory measures. Things can happen fast out there, and help could be a long distance away. Have you ever been in any kind of like bad situation?
Just with bears or any kind of
No,
them?
just in general, like something that might stick out in your head, or where it was like, not a great experience in the backcountry.
Yeah, I think all of the experiences, in hindsight, they end up being great because you learn from them. But just recently, we were on a trip and we were doing a hunt, and we were looking for mountain goats. Didn't get anything, and didn't even see any mountain goats for starters. So we're getting ready to float. It was about 13 miles from where we put in on this river out to the highway, and it's all glacial fed water. So super duper cold, super silty. And up here, especially near the headwaters, you're going to have a ton of log jams and sweepers and strainers and stuff that's just in the river blocking the current. And we hadn't been on the water for more than a mile, and my boyfriend Brad was ahead of me, and he came around a corner. I watched him go around the corner, and it was a blind corner where I wasn't sure what was coming up. And so I just happened to get out of my boat on the right-hand side of the river, run downstream, and by the time I got 100 yards downstream to where he was slung up around this log jam, and his boat was getting, thrashed by the waves. And it was really scary because there was nothing that I could do from where I was. And I just had to hope that he was going to be able to get himself unstuck. And thankfully, he was able to crawl up on top of this log jam, and he was working to get his boat free, and it broke loose and it headed downstream. So all of a sudden, we're 12 miles from the highway. We just lost the first aid kit. We lost his boat. We lost all of his layers. He is soaking wet. It's 50 degrees outside, and the inReach battery died, and the gun left with the pack. So all of a sudden, we basically lost half of our gear and half of our mode of transportation. And it's equidistance for us to float out to the highway or to hike back to where we started. So it just, stuff just got really real, really fast. And so it all worked out just fine. We ended up both getting into my boat and spending an unbelievable amount of time paddling downstream with two people in a one-person boat. And we eventually did find his raft. We found all this stuff. We got him warm, and it all turned out just fine. But there was a good solid hour there where it got really scary in the sense of okay, is he going to be hypothermic? Are we going to find the rest of the stuff? Are we going to be able to make it downriver with just one boat? And yeah, it's just, once again, a really good experience in hindsight, because now it's influenced how we pack our gear and just sort of the precautions that we'll take on future trips. But I think that's a good example of how things can change in 5 seconds time. You can be doing everything's going great, and then all of a sudden you take the wrong channel on a river and suddenly somebody's in the water, and then it's game on. So that definitely sticks out, since that was an experience we had this year.
Jeez. Yeah, that is scary. That's basically what I was kind of looking for, some type of, yeah.
Some sort
I
of scary
assume,
story.
I know you spend a lot of time out there, so I was assuming that you'd have something for me.
Yep, it usually involves cold water. If I have a scary story to tell, it's always
Yeah.
something about people falling in the water.
Well, there's no shortage of cold water in Alaska, right?
Yeah, seriously. I mean, it's so fun, but I tend to be, if we were ever to go on a trip together, you'd be like, man, this girl's kind of hypersensitive about safety when it comes to rafting, just because I've seen it happen too frequently, that people either aren't paying attention, or they're getting a little bit cocky, or they're not totally prepared for falling in the water, and then they do, and then you're so far from the road system that you suddenly basically have a victim on your hands that you have to take care of. So I don't take that stuff lightly.
No, I could pretty much assure you that you would be the person that I would want to be with, because I wouldn't want to being 12 miles away from anything and being wet and freezing cold and not having any gear does not sound like an experience that, I'm real eager to have.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, so yeah, it definitely, that's what I think I appreciate the most about Alaska too, is, that trip is literally, the trailhead that we started on is maybe 15 miles from our home, and we saw one other person while we were out there, for 3 days. So it's fantastic that you can get to such remote places so quickly. it just comes with I think a very big set of responsibilities, which is that you need to be completely self-sufficient, knowing that you may not have a way to communicate with the outside world, or that communication might fail, or things could happen, somebody could get hurt, and then you really have a situation on your hands. So I'm all for people taking swiftwater rescue training and wilderness first aid and taking that responsibility very seriously.
Yeah, no kidding. Um, you brought up BHA, and I guess I should have realized that that's kind of how we got hooked up, is through friends of mine that are BHA members, and they reached out to Heather's Choice because we're running a digital deer camp event essentially this fall. You're probably not familiar. Well, maybe you are. The term buck pole.
No.
It's more of a Midwest thing. So in Michigan, I think in Wisconsin, maybe Pennsylvania, some other states, it's extremely common to have a buck pole. So like opening day of firearms season here in the state of Michigan is November 15th, and typically anyone that is successful, deer hunting on that day, brings their buck back to camp or potentially like a municipal location on a larger scale, and they'll have what they call buck pole, which is like a social gathering where everybody brings their deer to basically showcase for other people to see and share the story of the successful hunt. And it's a huge tradition here in the state. Like every deer camp that you would go to typically is going to have a buck pole.
Wow.
And so I partnered with some friends of mine who have a website called Lifestyle Lost, and we wanted to do like a digital version, a larger scale buck pole, if you will, this year to essentially like strengthen the deer hunting community and a platform for people to meet and share their stories and come together. And deer hunting here in the Midwest can be extremely competitive. Guys get, their whole year, their whole life revolves around deer hunting, and a lot of that is big deer, who can get the biggest deer. And we've talked in length about a lot of times we feel that people overlook a lot of the simple joys and the experience of deer hunting, and it becomes more of this competitive nature, and everybody wants to get out and shoot the biggest deer. And sometimes guys get put in a situation where they might shoot a smaller deer, and then somebody might kind of heckle them, or that deer is not up to someone else's standards. And a lot of the reason that we're doing it is like the primal reason, right? Like we're going out to acquire food. So
yep.
We wanted to try to go, like I said, originally what we were going to do is have like a digital buck pole, and we decided to rename it Digital Deer Camp because we wanted to showcase more of the enjoyment of the hunting season and not have it essentially be like a big buck contest. And your company stepped up and sponsored the event, and I don't know if you know the details of what they are giving away, but they put in some prize packs and some gifts and some of your food for one of the contest winners to win.
Awesome. So freaking
Which
cool.
I thought it was super cool. Unfortunately, I'm excluded from winning since I'm going to be doing I'm going to be part of the judging poll. So I won't be getting to eat any free Heather's Choice food. But someone will have an opportunity to try some of the food, and I haven't seen what's in there yet, but I was on your Instagram and I was looking at a lot of your foods, and some of just the names of them are ridiculous enough without even looking at the pictures and then actually seeing the stuff. I mean, you're not kidding when you're talking about like some delicious food. I know you've used that word a couple times, and if anybody goes to your Instagram page, they can see for themselves. That stuff looks like if you were at like a 5-star restaurant and they poured that stuff out of the bag onto your plate and brought it out to you, you wouldn't know any different.
Yeah, thank you. There's definitely a handful of the meals and snacks that we have that I'm super duper proud of. Like I always take our smoked salmon chowder, our dark chocolate chili with bison, the blueberry buckwheat breakfast, and the orange vanilla packaroons. I take those on every trip now, and I think sometimes I forget how spoiled we are that at the drop of a hat we could say yes to going on a trip and all of our food is ready to rock and roll. We don't have to shop for any of it anymore.
Yeah, I'm going to be definitely purchasing some for this hunting season because, like I said, it can be hard. I don't have a lot of extra time nowadays to do a lot of meal prep and things like that. And I'm willing to pay the extra money for better food quality. So after seeing some of that stuff, I mean, dark chocolate chili with bison, right?
Yep.
Like that just sounds ridiculous. So I
Yeah.
don't know how I could go up to deer camp and not have that with me this year. So and my wife's like a macaroon nutcase. So I think I'm gonna surprise her and pick up some of those packaroons, and
Yeah,
I'm
awesome. She
thinking
will be
thinking she's
so
gonna
pumped.
enjoy those.
Yeah, I'm
Do you
doing
have a
it.
personal? I know you just mentioned those couple ones, but do you have like a personal favorite, or are those ones that you already listed? Is that it?
I would say so. I mean, I definitely have my favorites. So I really, really, really like the blueberry buckwheat breakfast. I always take that one. Recently, I've been loving the banana buckwheat breakfast with a scoop of peanut butter. It's like 650 or almost 700 calories if you add peanut butter to it. So the most recent trip that I did was definitely physically challenging. We were hiking, like I say, 7+ hours a day. So for me to get in a big whack of calories first thing with a cup of coffee really helps out. So the banana breakfast is great. The blueberry packarons that we just released this summer have been a humongous hit, but we do have 2 new flavors coming out for the holidays, which I think people will be really psyched about. And then really, I'm hoping that come Christmas, I'm going to have my own kitchen and get to release some brand new products and some brand new meals, which is going to be really, really gratifying. So wish me luck on that project.
Well, I absolutely will, and I look forward to paying attention and following along. And I think it's a great thing that you're doing. And you know, to going back on being a BHA member, that's awesome. It's one of the groups that I belong to that is that's a big part of my life. So, I wasn't even thinking in my head when we got on the phone tonight that you were a BHA member, but it's always seems like the most badass people that are out doing things in the outdoors seem to be BHA members. So there's a trend there.
Yeah, and BHA is, I'm so fortunate to have been welcomed into that community with open arms. And I spent the last, I think it was 2 weekends ago that I was in Montana with them doing a national board retreat. And it just further cemented how dedicated and how passionate of an organization they are. Land, who runs that, he gets so fired up and so excited about this idea of leaving behind a legacy and of impacting the next 7 generations and leaving these pieces of land just as they are today. And, if you can't get fired up and excited after listening to that guy talk, then you must not have a pulse. It is so moving to spend time with people like that. So I'm definitely honored to be a part of BHA and look forward to being a lifetime member for sure.
Awesome. Well, same here. and I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk. And thanks for, I know you're, what, 4 hours behind me? What, it's 4:30, so you kind of took time out of the middle of your day today to do this, and I really appreciate it. So
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I look forward to taking you around to all the microbreweries here in Anchorage when you come up for your next hunting trip.
I'm gonna make a plan of it. So at some point, it might not be in the short-term future, but it is in the future, and it will happen. I will guarantee you it. So
Yeah, awesome. Well, we'll look forward to it then. Thank you so much, Kevin.
okay, sounds good, Heather. Have a good afternoon.
You too.